Welcome to Women Who Kick Class, the podcast that dives into the fearless women who changed history and the fights that are still shaping our world today. From suffragists to civil rights activists, these women refuse to back down, breaking barriers and demanding change. And now, here's your host, an advocate, a storyteller, and a woman who kicks class herself, Ann Potenza.
Did you know that women were prohibited from acting on stage during Shakespeare's era? Yes. All acting roles, including female roles, were all acted by men, which included women's costumes, women's makeup, all to create the illusion of a woman's female form. And many of Shakespeare's plays featured characters who cross-dressed. In As You Like It, The Merchant of Venice, The Twelfth Night, even A Midsummer Night's Dream, all had a male actor who was dressed as a woman, who then cross-dressed to be a male in the play. So in Shakespeare's world, gender and dress is a playground to explore comedy and tragedy and the perils of romance. So how is Shakespeare's world much different from today, where performances of the art form of drag feature individuals, often men, who dress in makeup and clothing of the opposite gender to entertain, to perform, to create a world of entertainment? One of the theories of the word drag actually stems from Shakespearean times when men would wear dresses that would drag on the floor on stage. Which brings me to our suffragist of today, Amelia Bloomer. Amelia Jenks Bloomer was one of our early suffragists, an editor, and a social activist. We're talking the mid-1800s. She was also a fashion advocate who worked to change women's clothing styles. Amelia was born in Homer, New York, and with only a few years of formal education, she still worked as a teacher, educating students in her community. When she got married, she moved to Seneca Falls, New York, and we know Seneca Falls was like the hotbed of the women's movement because many of the early suffragists lived there, started there, and Amelia was also one to get very involved politically and actively in her community. She joined a church, and she was very active at first in the temperance society. And many of our suffragists were also very involved in local temperance societies because alcohol was a big problem in those days. A lot of the women used to have to deal with drunken husbands and abuse because of alcohol being a problem in their marriage, in their household. So a lot of the women who then went on to be abolitionists and suffragists started out usually through their church of being a part of these temperance societies. So her husband appreciated that she was very involved with the politics and social reform in her community, and he encouraged her to start writing about it, which is what she did. So she started writing a lot of articles for the newspaper about many topics that were directly affecting her community. And yes, Amelia was there at the very first Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention in 1848, and it was at that time that she started her newspaper called The Lily. Did you know that The Lily was the first U.S. newspaper to be edited by and for women? In its first issue, Amelia wrote, "It is women that speaks through the lily. Intemperance is the great foe to her peace and happiness. It is that, above all else, that has made her home desolate and beggared her offspring. Surely she has the right to wield her pen for its suppression. Surely she may, without throwing aside the modest refinements which so much become her sex, use her influence to lead her fellow mortals from the destroyer's path." One of the reasons why Amelia started the Lily newspaper was because during that time period, women lecturers were not seen as the best way for women to work to reform. So she thought that writing would be a better instrument to get her points across. And this is how Amelia described her experience as being the first woman to own, edit, and operate a newspaper for women. "It was a needed instrument to spread abroad the truth of a new gospel to women, and I could not withhold my hand to stay the work I had begun. I saw not the end from the beginning, and dreamed where to my propositions to society would lead me. And she also wrote that the only way a woman can be effective for temperance and women's rights is through the ballot box. So when she started the Lily newspaper, it was originally only intended for the women who had attended the Seneca Falls Convention because it mainly dealt with the temperance movement. She started noticing the health hazards and restrictions of corsets and dresses for women during that time period. So she started pushing for women to find a new style of dress. So the Bloomers actually started with Elizabeth Cady Stanton's cousin, Elizabeth Smith Miller, in 1851. She adopted what she considered a more rational costume, which were loose trousers gathered at the ankles, almost like what they wore in the Middle East and Central Asia. And it was topped by a short dress or a vest. So Elizabeth Smith Miller wore this to her cousin's house, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton adopted the same style of dress. So it was when Elizabeth Cady Stanton was at Amelia Bloomer's house, and then Amelia started wearing the same outfit and promoting it in her magazine, The Lily. What started as a circulation of only a few hundred soon grew and became like over 4,000. And as The Lily blossomed, literally, Amelia's most influential work was her passion for dress reform. So what came out of that was a pantaloon style, which we now know as Bloomers, named after her, because it was her newspaper that got the word out about this new form of dress that would help women not be as restricted and have many more opportunities for work, for exercise, for health. Then it started to become a trend because then articles on the Bloomers started to be written in the New York Tribune, and more women just started wearing this fashion. And then it was just dubbed the Bloomer costume or Bloomers. It's just like today when we read the fashion magazines and we adopt the new style of clothing. And yes, because it became representative of the women's movement and women going against the norm of those days, there were also plenty of criticism against Bloomers and how it went against the traditions of society during that time. There were many people that were offended that a woman would try to look like a man, and there were also in some of the magazines, they ridiculed the women, but there's one that had a picture of women at one of the conventions, and they were there in trousers and jackets and wearing boots and smoking cigars, as if like all the women changed into men just because they were wearing Bloomers, skirts gathered at the ankles rather than the traditional skirts. I think what it boiled down to was that a woman wearing Bloomers, which is a woman wearing pants, a man's garment, is a question of power. The symbolism of Bloomers was enormous. Unfortunately, a lot of men felt threatened by them, and many of them disparaged women by calling them Amazons or male impersonators. But the Bloomers worked for so many. We had the progressive movement of the women who saw the Bloomers as a symbol of the suffrage movement, and they took on that dress. We had the health advocates take on Bloomers because it was a healthier way of wearing garments and not tight and restricted. There were also workers. There was one mill who promoted for their workers to wear this type of garment because it was safer for the women and it was less restrictive and they were able to do more work. And Bloomers were everywhere for many, many years. And then fast forward to 1893, during the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, it made another revival because during that fair, women's health through exercise was a big focus. And this one woman who wore a form of Bloomers on a bicycle when she was going around the world on a bicycle, women started noticing that these bicycle shorts, which were actually Bloomers, were a great way to be able to bicycle and enjoy that form of exercise. So then it continued. Amelia didn't invent Bloomers, but she popularized it. And through her work as a suffragist, we credit Bloomers being part of the suffrage movement. And we thank Amelia Bloomer for writing about it and using her magazine, The Lily, to highlight the benefits of bloomers and better wear for women, which now we can't even imagine not being able to wear garments gathered at the ankles. So the next time you hop on your bicycle with ease, wearing your bicycle shorts, which were originally bloomers, we can thank Amelia Bloomer. It's because of her work with the suffrage movement and writing about it and letting her voice be heard that women's dress needs to change, that we benefit from her work over 150 years ago, when women were ridiculed, women were put down, women were laughed at, women were denied church membership because they chose to change their style. Which brings us full circle to looking back at Shakespeare in drag. And you're probably wondering, what does Amelia Bloomer have to do with drag and Shakespeare? Well, whether it's Amelia Bloomer's newspaper, The Lily, advocating for women's rights and women's dress reform, or whether it's an entertainer dressed in drag to perform in front of an audience, or it has Shakespeare's classics as men dressed as women disguising as men. I think the point of this whole episode is very clear in the anagram of the word Shakespeare, which spells out, "Hear me as I will speak." I'm Ann Potenza, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Women Who Kick Glass. Next week, we will be diving into the story of suffragist Florence Kelley. And until then, keep kicking glass.
Thanks for listening to Women Who Kick Glass. Be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. To learn more, contact the show. Visit womenwhokickglass.com. Until next time, keep kicking glass.